Welcome you all to the lecture series on corporate law. The present lecture that I will be discussing on dividends. The dividends basically are the returns for the investors, in particular to the equity shareholders as well as to the preferential shareholders. Now, the investors, whoever made the investments in company through share capital, will be looking for the dividends that whenever company declares that they want to receive the share on the profits when declared by the company. Companies Act 2013 talks with regard to the procedure for the declaration of dividend, payment of the dividend, and the amount which is paid if not claimed by the registered shareholder. What will happen to that particular money? Once the company declares the dividend, and if there is a failure on the part of the company, what is the liability of the company? What are the exceptions to the liability? Because at what point of time that company is not liable? We will see all these aspects one by one by looking into the provisions of Companies Act. Companies Act section 123 onwards talks about declaration of dividend. Now, when we see the meaning of the dividend under section 2, clause 35 of the Companies Act, there are two types of dividends which we can understand by reading of this proviso, that is the definition of dividend. According to the section 2, clause 35, dividend includes interim dividends. So therefore, we can understand there is one dividend which we can say final dividend, other dividend is interim dividend. So both comes under the definition of a dividend as such. Don't get confused. Dividend includes the interim dividend. Therefore, the meaning is that the dividend, that means the company which is paying to the shareholders out of the profits, at one point of time, they would be paying as the final amount. There is also a provision for interim dividend. It is what says in the, or it is what explained under the section 2, clause 35 of the Companies Act 2013. Now let us see about the section 123 of the Companies Act, which deals the declaration of the dividend. When we see the provisions, okay, let me try to explain by taking the sub-clauses of the dividend, sub-clauses of the provisions of law. So I will be discussing from here another 10-15 minutes by taking the examples of various provisions of Companies Act, particularly section 123 of the Companies Act. Now, the language of the company law, right? It starts like this. No dividend shall be declared except, right? Except out of the profits for that year arrived after depreciations. Now try to understand a simple example, right? I will try to explain by taking up the simple example. If the company gets, say for example, rupees 10 lakh rupees, right? Rupees 10 lakh as a profit, it is not supposed to declare, right? It is not supposed to declare the dividend out of these profits. after the profits being arrived, they also take the consideration of depreciation, right? Depreciation as per Companies Act. Because Companies Act provides the provisions and method of depreciation, right? The method of depreciation. So after depreciation, whatever the profits that arises, out of the profits, they can declare the dividend. So the first provision of the Companies Act is that in a particular year, right, in a particular financial year, from the profits, after the depreciation, they can declare about the dividend. And number two, they can also declare the dividends out of the profits of the previous years after the depreciations, because sometimes there may not be a profits also, or sometimes they may also not have the reserves, or what we can say the availability of the funds. So the first one is that at any point of the time, dividends are declared, right? The dividends are declared out of the profits after the depreciation. Kindly remember this one. The method of the depreciations and the calculation of the depreciations are to be counted, are to be calculated as per the provisions of Companies Act. And point number B, section 123 point number B, it says, in case of some of the classes of companies where the government takes the guarantee, right? Where the government provides the guarantee, for those companies, right? For those companies where the government takes the guarantee, the fund provided by the central government and the state government fund, then they can declare the dividend. So under section 123, which we see the clause number 1, out of the current year profits after depreciation, out of the profits of the previous year after the depreciation, and out of the money provided by the central government or the state government that guaranteed the government. So wherever the government guarantees according to the provisions of law, then they have the provision with regard to the payment of the dividend. Now, the other continuation of the same provision, they have to transfer some amount of the profits to the reserves. It is also a very simple principles of the understanding of the economics of the business or understanding of the sharing of the profits. So the Companies Act provides such a way, if there are profits of, say for example, I will take the small example to make very clear. If the company gets rupees 1 as a profit, right, rupees 1 as a profit, some amount will be a depreciation, some amount should be transferred to the, right, transferred to the reserves. So if you say there is a 1 rupee, out of 1 rupee, the depreciation is 10 paisa, you are sending some reserve to the another 10 paisa, so total amount is you are having 80 paisa. This amount you can calculate in the crores also, like 1 crore rupee or 1 crore rupees are there. So somewhere you put about the 10 lakhs or 10 lakhs like that. So I have taken a simple example of rupees 1. If the profits are arrived by any particular company, the complete profits are not supposed to be spent in any current financial year. Some amount has to be transferred to the general reserve, because that is very necessary. The company has to keep some money to keeping in the view that in future there may be a possibility, there may be a losses, because in every year and each and every year there may not be a profits. So in future, if the profits are not there, then automatically the reputation of the company will go down. Company may not be in a position to repay the dividends. So the market's fluctuations will be there. So therefore what will happen, even in the cases of losses, the company can pay the dividend out of the previous year's reserves. So therefore, the provision provides, if you have the profits in the current year, pay the money from the current year profits. If you don't have the money in the current year you can pay from the previous year reserves. This is what they call about the payment of the dividend. Now let us see about the section 123 clause number 3. The board of directors may declare interim dividend during any financial year, or any time during any financial year. So kindly remember, any time during financial year, out of the surplus of profit and loss account, or out of the profits of the financial year in which such interim dividend is sought to be declared. So in general, during the financial year, the board of directors can declare the interim dividend. Then interim dividend will be added into the final dividend in the case of the total dividend, when the total dividend is calculated in the annual general meetings. So what happens, the total dividend has to be calculated at the time of annual general meeting. If anybody wants to see the agendas of annual general meeting, one of the primary most agenda of the annual general meeting is that declaration of dividends. Because at the time of annual general meeting, every shareholder has the right to attend. So every shareholder is looking from the perspective of the company's balance sheet, profit and loss account, how much dividend that they're going to declare and how much profit they are going to get through the dividend. So this is what 123 clause number 3, where you find the terminology of the interim dividend. Now let us move to the section 123 clause number 4. The amount of the dividend, including interim dividend, shall be deposited in the scheduled bank in a separate account within 5 days after the declaration of dividend. Say for example, if the declared dividend, say on the 1st October 2022. So from there means 5 days means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5, 10, 2022. So within 5 days, the money has to be deposited into the account, a scheduled bank account. 124 clause number 5. No dividend shall be paid by company or registered shareholder of such shareholder or to his order to his banker shall not be payable except to the cash. So there is also a very interesting provision to whom the dividend has to be paid. The dividend is always paid to the registered shareholder of the shares, right? Or to his order to somebody else or to the banker. It shall be payable except in the cash. So nowadays what happens in 2022, once the company declares a dividend, the money is being transferred to a separate account. Once the money is transferred to the separate account, then the money will be what we can say the forwarded to the a separate account, and once the money is being separate account, then the money is being transferred in a different mechanism called NEFT, NIFT or RTGS, or otherwise called about the electronic modes, right? Electronic modes of the what we can say the electronic modes of the declaration of the dividend, the payment of the dividends. So now we are in a digital era where the promotion and payment of the money is given under the various provisions of company law. So when you see the section 123, it talks about the declaration of dividend, interim dividend, as well as final dividend. Dividend is paid out of current profits. Once you declare a dividend, the money has to be spent to the special account. So now let us talk about the section 124 of the Companies Act. Where a dividend has been declared but has not paid or claimed within 30 days from the date of declaration to any shareholder entitled to the payment of the dividend, the company within 7 days from the date of expiry of the said period, 30 days, transfer to unpaid dividend account. So they provided such a point of time. That means if it is not claimed within 30 days, from there with the 7 days, right? 30 plus 7, 37 days. So the money will be transferred to an account called unpaid dividend account, right? That's called as the unpaid dividend account. After that, if the company within 90 days prepare a list, submit to central government if nobody is claiming or company is not paying. In the case of default to transfer unpaid dividend account, within this particular point of time, the company has to pay a 12% interest. So company has to pay the dividend at any point of time. So kindly remember these particular principles. Once the company declares a dividend, it cannot say that I will not transfer the money, because it becomes a liability to the shareholders, particularly equity shareholders. Because preferential shareholders, we know very well, preferential shareholders are always having a preferential right on the dividends, or preferential shareholders already having the fixed dividend as such. So the company, once it pays the dividend, it has to transfer to a bank account, thereafter pay to the unpaid dividend account, otherwise prepare a list for the central government. So in the case if they are not doing, you are supposed to pay a particular percent of interest. A money transferred to the unpaid dividend account, right? A money transferred to unpaid dividend account which remains unpaid or unclaimed for a period of 7 years, then the money will be transferred to the fund called Investor Education Fund under section 125 of the Companies Act. So let us listen very simple concept. If the X Limited declare a dividend, it is transferred to the separate bank account, then unpaid dividend account. If no one is claiming this money, it will go to the Investor Education Fund, which is established in central government. Then this fund is spent for the different purposes, what is laid down under the section 125 of the Companies Act. The point here is that once the company declares a dividend, it has to pay to shareholders. Sometimes happens, there may be dispute over among the shareholders who has to claim. Sometimes shareholder may not be existing, maybe on the death of the shareholders. Sometimes shareholders becomes insolvent. There may be a court order where his properties have to be attached. Then court may say kindly confiscate his properties. So therefore the movable property has been confiscated. So like that, when there are circumstances where the money which has been declared by the company and the money which is declared by the company will go to the different stages at different point of time, and finally the money will go to the central government. The money will be spent for the purposes of Investor Education and Protection Fund, right? There are so many purposes are there under the Investor Education and Protection Fund. So the central government shall establish the fund to be called as Investor Education and Protection Fund under section 125 of the Companies Act. So the money is kept for the investors' educations. Some of may ask, sir, can you give any examples where this fund is being invested? I can tell one example. Today we have institute in Bombay called National Institute of Securities Market, right? National Institute of Securities Market, right? That is called as the NISM. NISM is conducting lot of training programs, lot of awareness programs for investigators' educations, for making the investors educated. So therefore, investors will be having the proper informed decisions. Investors may take independent judgments. So it is a duty of the central government and also the SEBI and other regulatory bodies to provide the proper informations, and for which they required some fund, for which they required some capital or the money. So therefore, once the company declares some money, company has no right to take back the money to their account. Since company has sent to an account and no one is claiming that money, and company cannot say that since no one is claiming that money, I will take back that particular money. So once the company declares, it will go to the shareholder. In the absence of the shareholder is not collecting, then finally money has to go to the central government. So this is very clear under the Companies Act. Once they declared of the dividend, so the money has to go either to the shareholder or to the central government. So kindly remember this particular logic. And the right to dividend under section 126. Section 126 talks about right to dividend, bonus issues, etc. What is this right to dividend means? Who has the right for dividend? So that means who can ask for the dividend or who can claim for the dividend. Now the question basically comes, where any instrument of transfer of shares has been delivered to any registration and transferred to unpaid dividend accounts. So there may be a lot of transfer of the shares on daily basis or from fraction of seconds. So whose so name appears in the register of charges, in the register of shareholders, right? Whose so name appears in the register of shareholders, we call them as the registered shareholders. They have the right to claim the dividend, right? If the dividend is declared today, the names whoso appears on today's date, they will have the right to claim the dividend. In the case if there is a transfer of the shares, the transferee has to make the claim. Since the name has been changed and the transferee will submit to the company, then automatically the dividend warrant also need to be changed. So they should be very careful when the purchase of the shares happens. So the people has to be observe the capital markets and the stock markets, whether company is delivering the dividend today or not. Even in the case if they deliver the dividend, so they should be very clear that whether I have a dividend to that or not, whether it is going to the transferor or transferee. So therefore the section 126 provides that who has the right to claim for the dividend. And section 127, if the company declares a dividend, right? If the company declares a dividend, fails to pay the money, then what will happen? Under section 126 of the Companies Act, it is provided that once the company declared a dividend, it has to pay within 30 days and not deposited. Every director is liable under the section 127 for the 2 years of imprisonment, or if the delay continues, then on every day the company has to pay 1000 rupees penalties. So it is again a very complicated provision when you look about the practicalities, because whenever there is the penalty and liability, now the question will come whether all the directors becomes liable, or the CEO will become liable, or executive directors are liable, or non-executive directors becomes liable. So that is again comes as another question, which is again legal debate and the legal discourse. Whenever there is a penalty and liability, the same law provided in certain circumstances there is no liability on the part of the company. Number one, right? Kindly remember this section 127. For the lawyers or the law students or anyone who is reading the law, the client comes to the lawyer sometimes from the shareholders' perspective, sometimes from the perspective of the directors. If a director approaches to you can you protect me? Can you save me from liability? How do you save? Right? Some lawyers or some law students, we have to provide the defenses. The defenses in such a sense, right? The defense in such a manner. So when there is no liability, when there is a liability. Under section 127 of the Companies Act, if the company failed to pay because of by operation of law. By operation of law means if sometimes there may be court orders like the freezing of accounts. There may be some activity or some of the court orders where the court prohibits stop all the banking transactions for a certain period of time. So the law has come into existence which tightens the hands of the management of the company where they are unable to deliver the money, deposit the money. So by operation of law includes company wants to pay, they decided, but still they are in the legal process. By virtue of the court orders, by virtue of the court decrees, they are unable to pay and so on. Number one. Number two, where there are communications between the transferor and transferee and it was informed to the shareholder due to some problem about the transfer of the share deeds, right? Due to some problem with regard to the communication between the transferor and transferee, company can take an exception that I don't have the liability. Number three, very important, dispute over the right to the dividend, right? Because if there is the legal representatives, right? And sometimes you are having with regard to the deceased persons. Sometimes you also talk about the who has the power. So if there is a dispute over the right to receive, then it is an exception. The company can say that since there is a dispute over the rights, then this becomes a protection towards the company. And point number D is very important. This we call it as a principle of a set off. Because if the company declare a dividend to the shareholder, say for example, company declared rupees 10 Mr. A, right? Company declared a dividend 10 rupees to Mr. A. Mr. A has to pay to the company, say for example, Mr. 20 rupees. Mr. A is supposed to pay 20 rupees to the company, whereas company has to pay rupees 10 as a dividend. In that case, company can set off, right, the minus 10. So therefore, it doesn't require to pay 10 rupees. End of the day, Mr. A is supposed to pay another 10 rupees. They say 20 minus 10, it becomes as a 10. That's where the point number D says, a dividend has been lawfully adjusted by the company against any sum due it from the shareholders. Some of you may have a doubt. Sir, what are the dues that the shareholder has to the company? In general, or the most of the time, uncalled share capital. Whenever the shareholder fails to pay the call money, and in the same time, if the company declares a dividend, then the company can make an adjustment between the call monies as well as with regard to the unpaid, the dues between the company and the shareholders. Point number C, any other reason and the default not paid by the company. So this is where the last clauses. So when we see section 127, there is a penalty which comes about the fine as well as to the 2 years imprisonment, and also we have the provision of the what we can say the imprisonment as well as the exception to liability. So now recapitulate again what we discussed. We started discussing about the meaning of the dividend, which is there in the section 2 clause number 35, followed by when the company can declare the dividend, and also the people who have a right to collect the dividend. Once the dividend is declared, in a particular span of the time, the company has to pay the money to the dividend account holders. If the company is not paid, then there is a liability. If the company paid, if nobody claims, so the money will be kept in an account for a period of 7 years. If nobody is claiming, and the money will go to the investor education fund, money will be used for the investor education and the protection fund. And section 126 and 127, the penalty and exception to the penalty and the exception to the liabilities. So hope you might have understood the very basics on law on dividend, right? It's very basic provisions on law on dividend. Then kindly listen. If you have any clarifications, you can write it on the chat box. Then I will be recording one more lecture with regard to the cases and the materials or the cases with regard to the dividends. And the disputes on dividends we will discuss in the next class or the next lecture, which I have proposed to conduct or record. So thank you once again for listening patiently. So see you later. Take care. Bye.